Welcome to Goddess Nadine's Magic Show. Just kidding. But what I do really is close to magic. And the reason I say that, I'm going to actually tell you the behind the scenes of how this magic works and where it came from. So, back in 2010, 2011 is when I first learned about NLP, Neuro Linguistic Programming. And since then, I've been using it in my work and literally have worked magic and miracles with this stuff. When I say that, I mean talking about things like treating PTSD. And a lot of people get upset when they hear this. But, PTSD actually is curable. And there's clinical research to prove it. Feel free to message me or leave a comment. If you want that clinical research, I'm happy to share. It'll be up on my website. Anyway, NLP is by itself is simply a modeling method to examine what works and help others recreate that in their own brains. And how it started was a computer programmer student was house sitting for a psychologist.
Computer programmer, Nick Delosio.
I wasn't talking to you. Sorry, that's my trigger word for the smart device. Oops. Anyway, a computer programmer was house sitting for a psychologist. And this is like in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. I don't know the exact year that this was started. And curious guy, he starts reading through this psychologist's books. And now Richard Bandler, who's the co-inventor of NLP, he's a pretty snarky, sarcastic guy. He's got definitely a quirky sense of humor. He is very programmer-esque in the way that he thinks about things, right? If, then, and, or. Very logical, also very sarcastic and snarky. So the way he tells the story, he's like, well, this guy had gone off to India to find himself. I don't know why, because he was right there. Anyway, just to give you a kind of a taste. So Bandler starts reading through this psychologist's books, and he begins to notice something. All of these psychological treatments are just based on theory. Like, in other words, there's no empirical data to say Jung's theories are more valid than Freud's theories, who, by the way, he calls that guy a sick man fraud. Because of his unhealthy obsession with sexuality as the root cause of everything. In any case, so he's reading through these books, and he's like, there's no empirical evidence here. And he doesn't really tell how he did, or why he teamed up, but he teamed up with a linguistics major named John Grinder. And together, they set out on this project, I think just out of curiosity at first, to see if there was a way to model the human mind and its processes, just like we, design computers to operate a certain way. What if our brains operate under similar principles? Turns out they do. So these guys, college students, set out to study people who had actually successfully done something. And the first thing that they picked was phobias. They put an ad out in the paper, or maybe multiple papers, and they got 200 people who had, one way or another, through any type of method, successfully gotten over a phobia. And they interviewed these people in detail. They asked them about what their brains were doing. And as Bandler tells it, he was like, so we'd ask them a question, and they'd say, let's see. And he's like, I'd write down, put left hand on forehead, look up with eye. Like, he was writing down all these details about how people are describing what they did and how they access the memory of it even. So the data, like, for example, now that we use in EMDR treatments about eye movements, that actually came from the development of NLP. It's kind of a bastardized offshoot of NLP, and it's not nearly as effective, but that's where that technique came from. In any case, they interviewed 200 of these people who had successfully overcome a phobia, and they noted all the commonalities between what these people had done to successfully overcome a phobia. And from that, they synthesized an approach that allows a clinician or an NLP practitioner to eliminate a phobia in as little as one session. Recently, I had one of my tenants who said that they had a phobia of bridges. And I said, I can get rid of that for you pretty quickly. And of course, he was skeptical. I said, look, it's not going to hurt you in any way. We don't do exposure therapy or anything like that. Literally, it's just me walking your brain through doing some new tricks. And it's kind of like guided meditation, but it's informed by neuroscience. So we sat down together, and I walked him through the phobia removal process. We did it a total of 3 times, maybe 4 times, I don't remember, but it took about 10 to 15 minutes. I mean, it's a very efficient and quick process because it works with how your brain processes and retrieves information to make it process and retrieve information a little bit differently. It's so fast. Like I said, it really is like magic, which is why I'm wearing the sparkly shirt today. Anyway, we finished his phobia removal 10, maybe 15 minutes tops. And I said, so how do you feel, when you think about walking over a bridge? And he was like, I don't feel any particular way about it. Now, prior to this, he had such a phobia of bridges, and he moved down here from Washington, so he said that he would actually walk up to a mile out of his way to avoid going over a bridge. Pretty intense. Not the most extreme phobia, but pretty intense. So I said, well, how do you feel? And he said, I don't feel any particular way about it. I said, well, do you want to test it now? I like to do things, but then I like to test them and make sure that they stick. Make sure that they're done properly. So he was like, sure, why not? So we had to, I looked up, Googled where the closest bridge was, which turned out to be Tempe Town Lake. It's a couple miles from me. Tempe Town Lake Bridge is a pretty long bridge, and it goes over Tempe Town Lake. And it's a really nice bridge. So we drive over there, and this was at nighttime too. I asked him, would you be more afraid of bridges at night? And he was like, oh, definitely. So this was like the worst conditions if he still had a phobia of bridges. We get there, we find a parking spot, we get out, we walk up to the bridge, we start walking on the bridge, we're walking across the bridge, we get all the way to the other side of the bridge. I said, how do you feel? He said, that was like just normal walking. Like, I didn't feel any apprehension, I didn't feel scared, totally fine. We walked back across the bridge. He did get startled on the way back by, I think it was a bird or something that like flew through, through our corner of our vision. He startled a little bit, and I was like, are you okay? And he's like, oh yeah, that was just the startlement from the movement of that thing. And we get back in the car and drive home. That was it. That's how easy it actually is to make changes in our brains when you actually understand how our minds work and how to effectively utilize how they work to make changes. Super fast, super simple, super easy. Same thing with PTSD, although the process takes a bit longer. I think the phobia removal is like a 10-step process, maybe 12 steps, and the PTSD removal is about 24 steps. So it's about twice as long. And typically people who have PTSD need more than just a single session. But the average is 1 to 3 sessions. The longest, most severe complex PTSD case that I've worked with took 4 sessions of the NLP techniques that I use. And we also worked together for a couple other weeks on, some additional coaching and relationship and communication strategies. So altogether, she worked with me for 6 weeks and recovery from her PTSD symptoms, which were extreme. She was having both visual and auditory hallucinations, uncontrollable rage outbursts, suicidal ideation, extreme depressive episodes. You name it, the symptoms were there. And now I didn't know any of this, or very little of it, until after she completed the program successfully. That's the other neat thing about neurolinguistic programming, is that unlike other therapies, you don't have to tell me your deepest, darkest secrets. In fact, I don't want to know. I'm not that voyeuristic. I do want to know after the fact, after it's all good, if you're willing to like give me a case study and share your story to show others what's possible. But going into it, I really don't need to know. Like I said, it's just walking your brain through doing some new tricks, teaching it some new processes, and effectively storing those traumatic memories differently than they currently exist, separating the connection of the memory from the emotional response, and teaching your brain new patterns, literally rewiring your brain. That's a topic for a whole nother video about how that works specifically. But if you need to change anything in your life, whether you work with me or not, I highly recommend looking into neurolinguistic programming, because it is the most quick, efficient, and painless modality that I know of. And I've seen it work in my own life. I've seen it work in my clients' lives. And it really is like magic.